What's going on, gang? Welcome back to another edition of Movie vs. Book. What's the Difference? Sponsored by Unpopular Opinion. And today, I've got quite the video for you. Today, we're going to be taking a look at the first entry into the Dan Brown's religious thriller series featuring Symbologist Robert Langdon, Angels and Demons. So, I've been wanting to talk about Dan Brown's work for the longest time on this channel. Dan Brown gets a bad rep for his controversial work, his writing style, and his clumsy, cheesy stories. However, I actually really love the Robert Langdon series, and I find it extremely interesting, fun, and it appeals to certain passions and interests that I have. Despite the fact that I'm a Catholic, and by technical definition, his work is blasphemy and really offensive, I could still find it really enjoyable and exciting. It's unfortunate that the movies inspired by his books aren't well received and were critically panned. Like I mentioned earlier, I've wanted to make a video on Angels and Demons or the Da Vinci Code for the longest time. They definitely qualify for an unpopular opinion review, but I feel like I could say more about them this way. So, for those who are unfamiliar with the Robert Langdon series, the stories for the most part follow a similar pattern. Harvard professor and genius Robert Langdon gets caught up in some adventure that typically has religious significance. He teams up with a woman, and over the course of 24 hours, they solve their mystery. Basically, this franchise is a more realistic and modern version of Indiana Jones, and it's like the National Treasure movies, but instead of gold or monetary valuables, the quests are religious ones. And Angels and Demons brilliantly kicked off this franchise. It introduced us to Langdon and gave us some quick thrills and fun academic lectures. But before I get into the review itself, I do want to say that I am fully aware of how Angels and Demons is full of inaccuracies, whether it be scientific, geographical, historical, or religious. I know full well it's gotten things wrong, or it says things that are blatantly not true but presents them as fact. I get it, but for the sake of consistency and reviewing the source material, I'm going to be using its logics and facts to be faithful to the story. And I'm not here to fact check anything, so I don't want people commenting saying that I'm personally incorrect for saying things like the Relativity or antimatter is a dangerous, unstable substance with explosive potential, the Catholic Church is misrepresented, etc. I get it. I'm just reviewing the story. So, with that out of the way, let's jump right into it. This is Angels and Demons, Movie vs. Book. What's the difference? So in terms of movie adaptations, I'd say Angels and Demons, the film, is about 50% faithful to the novel. It follows the same plot, it shares the same premise and story, but being that the book is so long and has a lot of dense material, obviously things were either condensed, omitted, changed, or disregarded. Some characters were left out, some were added, and others were pretty different compared to their novel counterparts, but the overall story of Angels and Demons in both mediums is a scientist at CERN was killed by the Illuminati, and a container of antimatter was stolen from his laboratory. This antimatter is extremely unstable and has the explosive power of a nuclear bomb. The Illuminati hides the antimatter somewhere in the Vatican City during conclave, which is the election of the new pope. The Illuminati kidnap the four most favored papal candidates, then they plan to murder them publicly and blow up the Vatican as revenge for the Catholic Church's crimes and aggression against men of science in the Illuminati, and Robert Langdon is called to save the day. Being that the movie condensed the first 100 pages of the book into its opening scene, this might be a bit confusing because I'm gonna have to jump around a bit, but bear with me. The film starts with a narration explaining how the Carmelango destroys the Pope's ring after he dies. In both movie and book, the Pope died mysteriously after a stroke. And now conclave begins, and the cardinals are to vote for the next pope. The cardinals who are most likely to be elected are called the Relativity. Then it takes us to CERN. We see a team of scientists working with a particle collider to create 3 canisters of antimatter. The lead scientist is killed and mutilated, and one of the canisters is gone. Then it jumps to Harvard University where an official from the Vatican approaches Professor Langdon. So right off the bat, when we begin the movie, there's a huge difference from the book. The novel begins when Professor Langdon gets a call from the head of CERN, Maximilian Kohlherr. Kohlherr's a very unpleasant man with a huge grudge against religion. He's unhealthy and has to use a wheelchair that's equipped with a lot of gadgets, like computers, cameras, etc. Kohlherr sends him a fax of a photograph of scientist Leonardo Vetra, dead, with an ambergram branded to his chest. Langdon flies to CERN in Geneva, Switzerland, on this advanced airplane sent by Kohlherr. The flight is only an hour. He's taken to the corpse of Vetra and is shocked at what he sees. Vetra is totally naked, and he has his head twisted 180 degrees in the wrong direction, and on his chest is an ambergram. the word Illuminati. Kohler explained that he found Vetra dead, but didn't alert the authorities or notify anyone else at CERN. He did that to preserve the secret work of Vetra and to spare CERN from any bad press or publicity. The only two people Kohler told about Vetra's death was Langdon and Vetra's adopted daughter, Victoria. Being that Professor Langdon is an expert on the Illuminati, he studies the ambigram and is in absolute disbelief. Langdon, nor any other symbologist, have never seen the Illuminati ambigram, and he knows it can only mean one thing: the Illuminati's returned. Despite initially believing otherwise, he eventually accepts that the Illuminati was responsible, but he still has his doubts. Langdon goes on to explain that the Illuminati were a secret society of men, and it literally means the enlightened ones. In the 1500s in Rome, a group of mathematicians, astronomers, scientists, etc. all met in secret to combat the Catholic Church's monopoly on what they proclaimed to be the truth. Their goal was to spread academic enlightenment and seek the truth through science. However, the Catholic Church hunted these men down, and they had to form an underground secret society to remain hidden. They met at their secret lair called the Church of Illumination. These Illuminatis were peaceful men of science, led by Galileo. Galileo wanted religion and science to be allies to help answer the world's biggest questions. The Church, however, didn't see it that way, and they had him arrested. The Illuminati's 4 biggest members were tortured and branded on the chest with the symbol of the cross. They were publicly killed in Rome. So the society fled. They went deep underground and merged heavily with other secret societies, but they swore revenge on the church. The Catholics then made lies about them, declaring them to be satanic, which is why today there's that misconception about the Illuminati. Eventually, Victoria arrives, and she reveals that her and her father were working on the particle collider to create antimatter. Her father, in addition to being a scientist, is also a Catholic priest, and by creating antimatter out of nothing, he literally proved creation theory from the Bible to be possible, therefore bridged the gap between God and science. She also shows them the antimatter that she and her father created. She explains how it's a powerful substance that could be used as a very useful new fuel source, but it's unstable when it comes into contact with matter, so it blows up. She even shows them a demonstration of it exploding. Under questioning, Victoria admits to creating a canister of antimatter the size of a full quarter gram, which is equivalent to a 5 kiloton bomb. She claims that no one knew about her and her father's work, and it was totally secret. And that large specimen was hidden, and their lab can only be accessed by retinal scanning. They discover Vetra's eye is missing, and it was used to gain entry into the lab, and to steal the giant antimatter specimen. They realize how much of a problem they have. Then CERN gets a phone call from the Vatican officials, saying that they believe their missing canister of antimatter is located somewhere in the city. Unfortunately, the movie skips this background and historical lecture. In fact, they skip this entire sequence. Maximilian Kolher makes no appearance in the movie, and Langdon doesn't go to CERN at all. In fact, like I mentioned earlier, the first 100 pages of the book are heavily condensed to be the first 10 minutes of the movie. A major difference between the movie and the book is how in the film it was a team of scientists working on the antimatter, not just Victoria and her dad. Also, the lead scientist in the movie wasn't Victoria's father. In the novel, Kolher doesn't call the authorities or make public that the antimatter was stolen. Therefore, when CERN is contacted by the Vatican, it's not out of concern so much as it's a curiosity as to why CERN property is in the Vatican. Kolher has a medical episode and is unable to go to Rome himself, so he sends Victoria on his behalf but demands that she takes Langdon with him. So they fly to Italy as soon as possible. In the movie, CERN doesn't hide the fact that their antimatter was stolen, so when the Vatican finds it, they're fully aware of the threat it possesses. So like I said earlier, the Vatican directly gets a hold of Langdon and they plead for his help. And this is, I feel, a good time to mention that the movie Angels and Demons is actually a sequel to the Da Vinci Code, whereas in the book, Angels and Demons is the first of the series, and the Da Vinci Code is the sequel, which is a major difference, and it creates a scenario that kind of makes no sense. Let me explain. Robert Langdon in the Da Vinci Code, both book and movie, uncovers the true secret of the Holy Grail, and in doing so, he pretty much disproves Christianity. So, it kind of makes no sense that the Vatican would go to the man who proved their religion was a lie. However, they do acknowledge this in the movie by saying this about him.
Your recent involvement with certain church mysteries, it did make you formidable.
So obviously this doesn't occur in the book. But anyway, in the novel, Langdon and Victoria fly to the Vatican, and they learn that conclave is taking place. The city isn't full of newsmen or journalists, but it has a handful of reporters. Nothing crazy though, whereas in the movie, conclave is being covered heavily by the media. Then they meet the head of the Swiss Guard, Commander Olivetti. He explains how one of their cameras was stolen, but it's still operational and it's broadcasting a live feed of the antimatter canister. The Vatican officials are totally unaware of the explosive capability of the antimatter. They view it as more of a breach in security than a serious bomb threat. Whereas in the movie, Langdon and Vittoria arrive separately. They meet each other for the first time at the Swiss Guard headquarters and are briefed about the situation. Needless to say, in the film, this threat is taken very seriously from the beginning. Also, movie Olivetti isn't the head of the Swiss Guard. He's the Inspector General of the Vatican Police. In the movie, the Swiss Guard is commanded by an aggressive hostile douche named Richter. In the novel, Olivetti doesn't order his men to start looking for the antimatter because he's very concerned about Conclave and protecting the cardinals. Vittoria tries to explain the severity of the situation, but to no avail. She and Langdon are locked in his office until further notice. However, she uses his phone to call the Pope's office and speaks directly to the Carmelengo. The Carmelengo is the Pope's chamberlain, who's in charge of the Vatican until another Pope is elected. They meet in his office to explain the situation. The Camerlengo is an Italian man named Carlo Ventrisca. He's very calm and has a soothing spiritual presence to him. While Vittoria is explaining the antimatter's capabilities, they get a bomb threat call where the terrorist uses the word antimatter. They're unable to trace the call, but they put the bomber on speakerphone. He explains how he hid the antimatter deep inside the Vatican City, and by midnight it'll explode, destroying the Catholic capital. He tells the Camerlengo he's a messenger for the Illuminati, and this is revenge for the Catholic Church's persecution of scientists. He also reveals how he kidnapped the 4 Preferiti, and plans to sacrifice them each on the altars of science, starting at 8 p.m. and the next will die an hour later, and so on and so forth. The caller reveals that he was the one who infiltrated CERN and killed Leonardo Vetra and stole his antimatter. Vittoria minces words with him, but he hangs up, leaving everyone in the room silent. Now, this is where it gets a little tricky comparing it to the movie. In the film, the killer had already kidnapped the Preferiti before Langdon arrived at the Vatican, and he didn't brand Vetra with the Illuminati ambergram. He merely sent the Vatican a picture of it. He sent them a video showing the cardinals locked in cages, then declaring how he was going to sacrifice each one on the altars of science. This knowledge was public to the city before Conclave began, as opposed to the novel where the characters had no idea what the Preferiti were, but decided to begin voting without them. In the movie, despite knowing full well about the bomb threat and the kidnapped cardinals, Conclave proceeds anyway. However, in the book and movie, the cardinals stall the election in hopes that one of the Preferiti will arrive. Now, the assassin in the movie is very different from the book. In the novel, we know from the beginning that he's not an Illuminatus, but was hired by the Illuminati Grandmaster named Janus. The film assassin was mocked up to look like the main bad guy until virtually the end, where it was revealed he was merely a pawn in the whole operation. The book assassin is from an old brotherhood of Middle Eastern assassins dating back to the Crusades. He's contacted by Janus, and after a demonstration of the Illuminati's power, he accepts the job. However, it isn't just a job. He's honored that the Illuminati chose him. He has a grudge against the Catholic Church and hates them for what they did to his kind during the Crusades. This man is muscular, well-trained, and agile. However, he's totally insane and mentally unstable. He gets a perverted pleasure from killing and is borderline psychotic, and he's more like a deranged serial killer for hire than an actual hitman. He also never met Janus face to face. All their contact was done over the phone. His movie counterpart is very different. In the movie, the assassin isn't Middle Eastern. He's an average built guy, and we don't know much about his background. He's just doing a contract. But this guy's a lot more deadly, much more graceful, and is what James Bond would look like if he turned evil. He doesn't speak much, and he keeps his composure and operates as a total professional. Also, while I'm on the subject of character differences, Robert Langdon is a bit different from his novel counterpart. In the novel, Robert Langdon's a smart guy, very kind, easygoing, and pleasant. He's not a wimp or a pushover, but he's not Mr. Macho. In the movie, Langdon at times is kind of a pompous douche. He goes around acting all cocky and arrogant. Movie Langdon likes to shove his knowledge and intellect into other characters' faces, or he sometimes chastises people for not knowing things that aren't common knowledge. For example,
La Purga? Geez, you guys don't even read your own history, do you?
and he's also pretty petty and acts immature about not being granted access to the Vatican archives in the beginning. Like, there was this one scene where he was explaining to a random Vatican official who was sent to get Langdon about how he wrote a book on the Illuminati but couldn't finish it due to being denied access to the archives. And he bitches to the guy and acts like it's his fault.
Haven't been able to finish part 2 because I'm not allowed access to your archives.
Needless to say, that book Langdon doesn't act like this. I think being that the movie's a sequel to the Da Vinci Code, Langdon gets this arrogant confidence boost because he fought with a dangerous Christian monk, he survived a few assassination attempts, and he discovered the Holy Grail. So This obviously went to his head, and now he thinks he's some kind of a big shot. Now, it's important to note that Book Langdon wasn't contacted by the Vatican to help. He was swept up into this situation by total coincidence and by being at the wrong place in the wrong time. So up until this point, he's just witnessing everything around him, not really offering much to help the crisis. Anyway, in the movie, Langdon is shown a video of the assassin announcing his plans to sacrifice each cardinal on the altars of science. The killer mentions the Church of Illumination, and Langdon believes he can discover the altars of science, and he can follow the legendary path of illumination, which leads to the Illuminati's secret lair, which he believes is where the antimatter is being held. Now, the path of illumination is described the same in both movie and book. It's a secret test of knowledge that the Illuminati used to recruit new members. Being that their society was secret and they couldn't publicly advertise about their meetings, they had to send hidden messages out to the public. Anyone smart enough to decipher them would have to solve the mysteries and walk the path of illumination, and the 4 altars of science were clues dedicated to the 4 classical elements: earth, air, fire, and water. These altars provided the clue for the next location until you find the Church of Illumination. Therefore, pass the Illuminati's initiation and you were worthy to become a member. In the book, after the assassin's phone call, Langdon finds a way he can help, and he chooses to find these altars of science and to run the path of illumination because it's the best chance they have at catching the assassin, and by doing so they could save the cardinals, question the killer about the location of the antimatter, and save the day. But despite being an expert on the Illuminati and the only one who could solve the clues, he needs to get his hands on vintage Illuminati documents kept in the Vatican archives. And in order to find the first marker, he asked permission to get access to the Vatican archives. In the book, Langdon asked the Camerlengo for permission and is given it without a fuss. In the movie, he asked for permission from the Swiss guard but is referred to the Camerlengo. The Camerlengo in the movie is very different from his novel counterpart. In the movie, his name is Patrick McKenna and he's not Italian, he's Irish. McKenna doesn't give Langdon permission to enter the archives right away. He asked him if he believes in God, to which Langdon responds,
Faith is a gift that I have yet to receive.
In both mediums, the Camerlengo orders the Swiss guard to search for the antimatter. The plan is to turn off the power in different grids of the city to help find the canister. In the movie, it's suggested to turn off the power because the camera live feed broadcast of the antimatter is lit by artificial light, and by cutting the power in specific sections, they could narrow down the possible locations. In the book, they cut the power so the authorities could detect any electromagnetic readings to find the antimatter. Logic being that if the power is on, it would potentially interfere with detecting such readings. The antimatter itself is much more unstable in the book. In order for it to be made safe again and prevent it from exploding, it needs to be flown back to CERN headquarters in Geneva to a holding facility. Therefore, the stakes are higher and the pressure is worse in the book. In the movie, that's not necessarily the case. If Vittoria finds the canister within 5 minutes of detonation, she could plug it into a device she brought to stabilize it and prevent it from falling out of suspension and exploding. In both movie and book, Langdon and Vittoria go to the archives to look for clues to find the first altar of science. Langdon believes the first clue is in one of Galileo's banned secret books, the Diagramma della Verità, the Diagram of Truth. He examines it and they discover a secret message written in English saying the path of light is laid, the secret test. Langdon is overjoyed to find the clue, but Vittoria impatiently removes the page from the safety of the Vatican archives and brings it outside. In the movie, she straight up rips a page out of Galileo's pamphlet, much to Langdon's horror. In the book, this forbidden work by Galileo wasn't a traditional book, but rather a collection of individual pages, so Vittoria doesn't actually partially destroy it, so when she brings it outside, it's not that much of a big deal. Langdon in both mediums reads the rest of the clue off the page and deduces that what he's looking for is a church that has a reference to the demon's hole. He believes it to be the Roman Pantheon. Langdon tells the authorities, but warns them that's their only hope of catching the killer, because any statues in reference to the classical element Earth have been removed and destroyed in the 1800s.
Because the Vatican destroyed all of the pagan statues in the late 1800s, this is it, your only chance.
Therefore, all possible clues to the next altar of science and the path of illumination are gone forever. Langdon and Vittoria are sent into the building undercover, posing as a married couple. In the novel, Olivetti gives Langdon a gun just in case anything happens, but in the movie, no one gives him a gun. However, after the authorities set up position at the Pantheon, Langdon realizes he made a critical mistake, and the first altar of science is actually at the Chigi Chapel. In the movie, Commander Richter gets pissed and doesn't order his men to join Langdon, and he chews him out for wasting valuable time. Nevertheless, they arrive at the chapel, but are too late. They find the first cardinal dead with dirt stuffed down his throat, and he's half buried. His chest is branded with the ambigram Earth. At this time in the book, the assassin tipped off the media about his plot, and a BBC news crew follows Langdon around Rome on his quest. And throughout the night, they document the events unfolding, and in doing so, they create a media frenzy. Swarms of people and reporters flood to the Vatican out of interest for the antimatter and the kidnapped cardinals. After the cardinal's body is recovered, Langdon figures out the location of the next altar of science. The altar is dedicated to air, and it's an elliptical block in St. Peter's Square of a face blowing a gust of wind. They race to get to it in time, but it's too late. The next cardinal is killed, and he too is branded with the ambergram air on his chest. He dies from puncture wounds on both of his lungs. Throughout the night, the authorities and Langdon suspect that the Illuminati have infiltrated the Vatican due to the killer having inside knowledge and being able to get around virtually undetected. So suspicions are high at this point. People are on edge, and the antimatter is nowhere near being discovered. Langdon goes back to the Vatican archives to try to uncover where the next altar of science is. This altar is the altar of fire. In the movie, Langdon is accompanied by a Swiss guard, but in the book, he goes alone. Meanwhile, Vittoria and the Camerlengo discuss the strange circumstances of the Pope's death. They suspect he was killed by the Illuminati. They go to his tomb and do an autopsy to reveal he was in fact killed by poisoning. During this sequence, we get a little backstory of the Camerlengo. His mother died in a terrorist attack when a church both he and his mom were attending got bombed. A cardinal who would eventually become the Pope raised the Camerlengo as a son. The Camerlengo survived the explosion under miraculous circumstances, and from that day forth, he believed God spared him for a special reason. Movie Vittoria has journals sent to the Vatican which chronicle the nature of her work. However, Commander Richter confiscates them and refuses to give them back. In the archives, Langdon discovers the location of the next altar of science, the Santa Maria della Vittoria, but the power is turned off and he's locked inside the archives. The oxygen in the room is turned off and the air slowly starts to run out. As he slowly suffocates, he tries desperately to escape by destroying the bulletproof glass window. In the movie, the Swiss guard faints after a failed attempt to break the glass, so Langdon pulls a Hans Gruber.
Shoot the glass.
He fires at the glass and drops a bookshelf on it, and only at the last minute does it give way. In the novel, Langdon doesn't have the gun Olivetti gave him anymore, so he knocks over a bunch of bookshelves and they fall like dominoes, so the combined strength and force of all those shelves hitting the glass causes it to break open. In both cases, he barely survives. In the novel, Olivetti and his subordinates apologize profusely for what happened to Langdon. They cut the power in the archives not knowing he was in there. In the movie, they do tell Langdon it was an accident, but he believes it was an assassination attempt by the Illuminati. Now, this is where the differences begin again. In the novel, Vittoria goes with Langdon to the Santa Maria della Vittoria. Olivetti accompanies them, and when they enter the church, they're met with an awful sight. One of the Preferiti is tied up, and he's being burned alive. His chest is branded with the ambergram fire. Langdon tries to save him, but fails, and the assassin emerges and knocks out Vittoria. Olivetti is also killed. Now, in the movie, Vittoria does not go to the church with Langdon, and she isn't kidnapped. And when Langdon arrives, there's a big shootout where many police are killed. Olivetti has his throat sliced after trying to fight with the assassin, but is easily overpowered. In the movie, Langdon slips away and hides while the assassin lets him live, but in the book, the assassin tries to kill Langdon and chases him. Langdon hides in a sarcophagus, then a tomb. The assassin assumes he's dead and leaves, taking the unconscious Vittoria with him. He brings her back to the Church of Illumination, where he plans to rape her. He molests her a little bit before he leaves to kill the last cardinal. In both mediums, Langdon is rescued and deduces that the last altar of science is a fountain. The last altar is the Fontana de Quattro Fiumi. Langdon in the novel goes alone with a gun he took from Olivetti's dead body. At this point, all he has on his mind is to save Vittoria. The killer drops the final cardinal in the water tied to heavy weights. Langdon gets the jump on the assassin and blows his toe off by shooting him in the foot. The assassin then beats Langdon and attempts to drown him in the fountain. Langdon pretends to die, but he actually survives by using the fountain's air tube to breathe. Unfortunately, the cardinal dies, and on his chest, the word water is branded. In the movie, the scene is very different. Langdon goes to the fountain with two cops. They see a suspicious van, but they're killed when they approach it. Langdon witnesses the killer drop the cardinal in the water tied to heavy weights. Then the assassin flees the scene. The key difference is Langdon actually manages to save the cardinal. He and a few bystanders rescue him. In both mediums, he uses the fountain to discover the final clue, the location of the Illuminati lair. Meanwhile, back in the Vatican, some fishy behavior is happening. In the movie, Richter is just acting suspicious and tensions are high. He goes to see the Camerlengo alone and dismisses the other guards. In the book, second in command Captain Rocher is suspecting foul play when the Camerlengo refuses to evacuate the College of Cardinals. Then, they get a phone call from head of CERN, Maximilian Kolher. He flies to the Vatican to have a private meeting with the Camerlengo in reference to the antimatter and CERN. So, in both movie and book, Langdon uncovers the location of the Illuminati lair. It's the Castel Sant'Angelo. In the movie, Langdon and Vittoria arrive with the authorities and search for the antimatter canister. The killer is watching from the shadows. He eventually reveals himself, and he tells the two he will not kill them because they pose no threat to him, and he wasn't paid to do so. He gives a cryptic clue about who his contractor is, and then he leaves.
Be careful. These are men of God.
However, he's betrayed by his employer, and he himself is assassinated during a car bombing. The movie, again, it's very different from the book. In the book, Langdon arrives at the castle and he tries to fight with the assassin to save the girl. Vittoria is all tied up while Langdon uses a giant metal pole as a weapon. However, it's not much of a fight, it's merely the two circling around each other while exchanging some dialogue full of exposition. And it ends with Vittoria escaping her ropes. She's not tied up anymore, and both she and Langdon push the assassin out the window to his death. In both book and movie, the two race back to the Vatican in a secret passage. They arrive to hear the Camerlengo screaming in pain. In the movie, the Swiss Guard enter the Pope's office and they see the Camerlengo branded lying on his back, with Richter standing over him and his gun is drawn, and a red-hot brand is at his feet. He's promptly shot to death, and an archbishop charges McKenna to attack, but is shot when he's called an Illuminatus. The brand on McKenna's chest is the Vatican symbol turned upside down. Richter hands a key to Langdon right before he dies. It's kind of mysterious, but that's when the Camerlengo, he orders an evacuation. Langdon suspects the burn. It's a reference to St. Peter since it's upside down, being that St. Peter was crucified upside down. So they go to the tomb of St. Peter, and that's where they discover the antimatter. In the book, the Swiss Guard enter the room, and they see Maximilian Kolher with a gun and the legendary Illuminati diamond brand at his feet. He's shot and killed, and second in command Captain Rocher comes running into the office, but is shot when the Camerlengo claims he's an Illuminatus. Before Kolher dies, he hands Langdon a tiny recording device. Carlo was branded with an ambigram of all classical elements. He goes delirious with pain and is brought out, along with the rest of the cardinals, to evacuate. Carlo then gets a vision from God, showing him where the antimatter is, and he dashes to the tomb of St. Peter. There they find the antimatter. In both mediums, time has run out, and the Camerlengo takes the canister and flies it high into the sky to minimize the damage to the city. In the movie, he goes alone. In the book, Langdon joins him. The Camerlengo jumps and parachutes to safety, to much applause from the crowd and people in St. Peter's Square. In the book, Langdon jumps from the helicopter and uses a makeshift parachute, but crashes into the Tiber River. The antimatter detonates and no one is killed. The people in the Cardinals sing and chant the Camerlengo's name and hail him as a hero. The Catholic world is united and spirits are sky high. Vittoria in the novel is deeply saddened by Langdon's death, but unbeknownst to her and the Camerlengo, Langdon didn't die. In fact, he's virtually unscathed. This is when Langdon makes a startling discovery. Meanwhile, in the Vatican, the Cardinals are believing that what happened was an act of God. The people of the world are united and they're singing, "No one died," and the church was saved by Carlo. He's called to the Sistine Chapel to be commended for his heroism. That is until Professor Langdon comes and makes a dramatic entrance. Like a boss, he walks up to Vittoria and makes out with her in front of everybody. And then he brings a TV playing the footage from Kolher's recording device. To Carlo's horror, Kolher secretly videotaped their entire conversation. The movie has a similar sequence, except Langdon discovers the truth by using the key Richter gave him to gain access to a secret camera feed of the Pope's office. This is when the truth is revealed. Now, the conversation in the Pope's office and the outcome are exactly the same, just the characters are changed. But what is revealed is the Camerlengo was the villain all along. In both mediums, he confesses to killing the Pope. He confesses to orchestrating the events of the night by hiring a killer to kidnap the Cardinals, then have them publicly killed. As for the Illuminati, they had nothing to do with this. Langdon's original suspicion of them being extinct was correct. The Camerlengo, having access to the Papal Vault, discovered the Illuminati brands, the Path of Illumination, the lair to the Church of the Illuminati, and all the other necessary background information to create a false flag operation.
You murdered the Vicar of Christ.
His motives were to cleanse the Catholic Church from within. He was made aware of CERN's work with the antimatter after the Pope and him were contacted by CERN, and he was horrified at what he believed to be sacrilegious work.
His work was not religious, it was sacrilegious.
The Pope actually supported CERN's work and encouraged them to continue and eventually to go public. He believed that they could scientifically prove the existence of God and close the gap between religion and science. The Camerlengo's logic was,
if science is allowed to claim the power of creation, what is left for God?
Now, in the movie, Commander Richter uncovered the truth after he read the journals from CERN and went to confront McKenna to put a stop to this. He also informed that Archbishop of the plot and was told to warn the other cardinals. In the book, Maximilian Kolher figures it out and plans to kill the Camerlengo. He also tells Captain Rocher of the plot. The Camerlengo in both mediums brands himself and tricks the Swiss guard into killing the only two people who know the truth. In the novel, the Camerlengo's motives were a bit more personal. He was upset that the Pope wasn't taking a harder stance against CERN and science, but the Pope reveals that he owes science a great debt because through it he was able to have a son. Carlo, in a fit of anger, is outraged that the Pope is a real father and storms out, believing that he broke his celibacy vows. He snaps and his mental state deteriorates. While crying from his mental breakdown, he believes God spoke to him and instructed him to act. Believing this to be God's will, he kills the Pope and orchestrates the whole plot. He was Janus, the supposed Grand Master of the Illuminati, which, in the name Janus, it's a reference to the two-faced Roman god. Therefore, that's a pretty awesome metaphor. He hired the assassin and planted the antimatter, and he faked the whole vision from God, telling him where the antimatter was. However, the College of Cardinals informs Carlo that the Pope didn't break his celibacy vows. In fact, the Pope was actually Carlo's biological father. The Pope conceived Carlo with a nun he fell in love with through artificial insemination. That's why he was in debt with science, because through science he was able to experience the joys of fatherhood. He never revealed this information to Carlo, but that's the reason why he raised him after his mom died. This sends him into a deep, spiraling depression and worsens his already weak mental state. So out of a mixture of grief, remorse, and delusion, and still believing everything he did was in the name of God and God's will, he plans to sacrifice himself, just like Jesus. In the movie, the whole background, this doesn't happen. McKenna is not the biological kid of the Pope. Langdon shows the Cardinals the footage from the Pope's office, and they summon him to the Sistine Chapel. He realizes the jig is up, and he tries to flee. Not wanting to be taken alive, he burns himself, and dies screaming in agony. In the novel, he chooses to burn himself on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. He sets himself on fire in front of a crowd of people, and he died silently without screaming. Now, I don't want to do this. This is kind of annoying and too obvious, but I'm contractually obligated to make an Obi Wan joke. Hey, Obi Wan, guess what? Now you don't have the high ground. Burn. I'm so sorry for that. Anyway, the novel ends with a new pope being elected. Cardinal Mortati, the head of the conclave election, is voted the new pope. In the movie, the surviving Preferiti is elected the pope, and to show his gratitude to Langdon for saving his life, he's given Galileo's book, The Diagram of Truth, to complete his scholarly work. In the novel, Langdon is given the Illuminati diamond brand. The novel ends with Victoria and Langdon sharing a hotel room, and
him and her got it on. Woo-wee!
So, Book Langdon gets a happier ending, literally and figuratively. This movie's full of great puns and one-liners. Again, I am so sorry for that really bad joke. Anyway, my friends, that's gonna wrap this video up. Those are the main differences between angels and demons. Now, I know I missed certain things, and I just left out certain plot points, but I chose to focus on the more important details, as opposed to chronicling every subplot difference and going into massive detail on the history and background. Either way, guys, that's gonna do it. Angels and Demons was a really good read and a very fun, enjoyable watch. Were there moments that were cheesy and required a huge suspension of disbelief? Absolutely. But in the end, the book was great, the movie was awesome, and overall made for an epic story. Well, my friends, that's all I have for you. Remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next, well, sort of, unpopular opinion.